Hi, yes, hi, welcome everybody, and welcome in my kitchen. It's a strange world we live in. Yes, my name is Erik, and I'm a software engineer at Bol.com, and today we're going to talk about growing as a software engineer, increasing the output of yourself and others around you, and also talk about making the step from medior to senior or even maybe even expert developer. Or in any case, I'll try to say something about how you can become a more skilled developer. Please ask any questions during this talk in the chat, but please note that I will answer the questions at the end of this talk and not immediately. So if you ask any questions, provide some context so we can get back to that later. All right, but first I have some questions for you. Who has ever picked up a story where you lost some time because the description or the assumptions were wrong actually? Who likes to be involved in the design of solutions? Yes, right, yes. Different question. Who has ever been frustrated because you came up with the perfect solution to a certain issue, you presented it, and other people that you presented it to had actually other ideas, and then the discussion felt more like a battle than a cooperative session? Well, I know I've been there. Last question, who wants to get a promotion? Yes, right. Okay, obviously I cannot see you guys, but I'm just imagining that everybody's like waving frantically right now. Me. Okay. Okay, so these are all questions that we're going to talk about now. Yes. All right, you are awesome. Suppose you are a Meteor software engineer. What does it mean? Well, you know about your domain, you know your programming languages, you know who to ask questions to, you know how to independently solve any story. Basically, you understand the problems and the solutions that you're working on. You do code reviewing. All in all, you're very valuable to Bol.com. However, there are two problems. One, you have only limited time, right? Second, there's only one of you. How unfortunate is that? We're still waiting for more cloning technology here. So we have to ask ourselves, how can you use your time best? And how can you grow as a software engineer even more? Or suppose you are a senior software engineer, but you're struggling with how to share your experience with others. Or you feel like you are too busy to do all the things that you want to do. Again, how can you use your time best? And maybe how can we have more software engineers who are experienced like you? If these are the kind of questions that interest you, then please stick around. All right, I believe that growing as a software engineer from medior to senior to expert, there's a lot to it, but there are three aspects that where you can make a difference that I'd like to talk about. First of all, it's about taking up more responsibility, and in particular, being involved in not just the building of solutions, but also the designing of solutions. And also, those solutions will become bigger and bigger as you grow as a software engineer. It might start with building a solution to a problem that involves one of your microservices. Next would be a feature that involves multiple microservices in your OPEX that you're building a solution for. And even further would be you can have a big company-wide feature that involves multiple teams and lots of microservices that you're helping to design a solution for. So we're going to talk about that. Second, growing a software engineer means that you have to increase the impact that you have on the company, but also on other people around you. So those solutions to problems that are bigger and bigger is one part of that. But another important aspect, I believe, is to help other people to grow. So basically, to increase your impact through others. And thirdly, I think we're going to talk a little bit about working efficiently and focusing on what's important. Okay, so let's dive in. Designing solutions I think, is a hugely important skill of a software engineer. And it's a lot of fun, but it can be difficult, and it can also be frustrating sometimes. So what I would like to talk about is to give you some tips on how to approach this and to set you up for success. So we're giving a certain problem or a feature, and we're asked to design a solution for that. What are we going to do? First up, we start with analysis. What we're going to do is we're going to find all the details, requirements. What do we want? What do we need? Well, that makes sense, right? What I want to mention is you cannot do that alone usually. So you need to reach out, you need to talk to other people, and you need to check assumptions and get all the facts straight. For example, just because a certain endpoint is there, that doesn't mean that it always returns exactly what you need. So if you're going to connect to another endpoint, reach out to the team that's owning the endpoint and ask them, like, hey, I want to connect to your endpoint. I want to use this and this and that. Are my assumptions correct? This might save you a lot of trouble later on. Or another example is, do not assume that your business analyst has thought of every scenario. We are all human. We might have missed something. So it's better to double check that everything is clear. So all in all, think it through, get a good grasp of the problem that you're tackling, write it down. I'd like to also note that the size of the problem determines more or less to what level of detail you need to go into when designing a solution. All right, second step. This is the fun part, problem solving. So we're actually going to solve the problem. First thing that's important is to make sure that you're actually involved in the decision, that you're actually involved in the whole problem solving. Can happen that people will make decisions without you being there. So try to avoid that by mentioning to your product owner and business analyst, etc. This point is hugely important. I believe that if you're going to design solutions, you should always try to consider multiple solutions. It's tempting to come up with a certain solution and then just stick to it, and you think like, oh, this works, this is perfect, work is done, I'm done. I would urge you and advise you to think of alternative solutions as well. So think you came up with a solution which uses some synchronous connection. What about if you do it asynchronously? Think also about that. Or you came up with a solution where you do something one by one. What about if we do it all at once? If you start doing that, and also if you start writing down the pros and cons of these multiple solutions, that will really help you a lot. I will come back to this later, but at least at this point, it will help you to get a really good feeling of the problem and what possibilities are out there, and already give you an idea of what could be the best solution. Of course, we write it all down. Now, if the problem and what you're working on and the solutions get bigger, there's also more choices to be made, usually more and more freedom. And that's when that happens, I think it's important that you try to think like an architect, as I call it. And that means if you have to decide which logic goes into which microservice, for example, focus on the responsibility of those microservices. It's also very useful in those scenarios to zoom out a little bit and think long term, what is the vision of what we're working towards? Because that will give you some guidelines on to follow and make sure that your solution is going in the right direction. And again, pros and cons. Write it down, it will help you a lot later. Okay. All this, I think, will help you to come up with appropriate solutions. Next up, this is at a certain point, these solutions need to be turned into implementations, of course, and user stories are part of that process. And I want to mention this because this is a step where you can really make a difference. Writing good user stories is also a skill. And what I would like to point out is that a good user story makes sure that whoever picks up the story, whether it's the most junior or the most senior developer in your team, the outcome will to a great extent be the same. If you can get that in your user stories, then I think you did a good job. Or in our team, this is just an example, but in our team, for example, we add usually a little to build section in every user story to help the developer. It's like a written by a developer helping the implementing developer. And what we do there is, for example, if we're building a new endpoint, we would write down, okay, this is the input and this is the output of the new endpoint. Or these are the database columns that we're going to add, or this is the domain object that we're going to adjust. Again, the idea would be to help the developer to build that thing that you intended to build. Slightly related to this, I think it's a good idea to not cut down on marketplaces and refinements. I know that there are product owners, sometimes they focus very much on getting stories pokered. They want to get the story points and then it's done. Personally, I feel like a marketplace has the most value in discussing the user stories and making sure that everybody understands really what's necessary to build. So if that means that you need a little bit more time, you need more marketplaces to get that done, then I definitely think that that's a good investment of your time as a team. All right, so all of this is meant to set up the people implementing the stories for success. Another aspect of growing as a software engineer is to increase the impact that you have on other people. Basically, it's the opposite of doing everything by yourself. And the first step is to involve your team. So we talked about these problems, these solutions that we're designing, and at a certain point, it's after the solution designing phase, it's the perfect time to start involving your team. And hopefully you will, with your team, be able to make lots of decisions together also in this process. So what do I mean with that? You have already come up with some solutions, right? You can share those thoughts and ideas with your team. You can ask for input to your team, and your team will see things that you overlooked. You already thought about pros and cons, so you can share that with your team and decide together with your team, hey, what do we think is the best solution given all these pros and cons? If you start doing that, I think it will really give you a world of good. To name a few things, hopefully the solution that you choose for at the end will be a better solution than you came up by yourself because of the input from your teammates. Also, you're already sharing knowledge with your team by going through this whole process. So it will make it easier during marketplace and implementation. Another thing, by showing the process that you went through with your approach and considering multiple solutions, writing down pros and cons, you're sort of teaching by example to the others how they can also approach problem solving successfully. You are building the support of your team for the chosen solution because you're making the decision together. This is a big thing, and it can avoid a lot of frustration. And basically, it's an opportunity to share the fun of choosing a solution together. As I said, increasing your impact is also helping others to grow. And part of that is giving responsibility. So it means giving responsibility in other members in your team. You start small, it can be something like deployments, but it gets bigger and bigger, doing analysis, story writing, and solution design. In our team, for example, what we usually do is we have what we call sort of mini epics or internal epics, and we assign a lead within the team to a certain epic. These can be very small things like improve monitoring, and we have an epic lead for that in the team, or it can be something really big like building a whole new microservice. Can also be a duo of two people. For example, if you team up a junior and a senior engineer, that's a great way of sharing experience between these people. Now, if you do this, you give responsibility, you give other people the opportunity to grow. So, and at the same time, if it goes well, it's going to free up time for you. So it really is a win-win situation if things go well. Of course, if the subject that the team lead is working on is very important, then stay in the loop to make sure that things are going in the right direction. And also, I'd like to note that if you are not getting any responsibility and not getting any fun, then ask for it, right? Don't be shy and step up. Yes. All right. Sharing knowledge is another way to help yourself and others to grow. There's only one you, like I said, but what we can try to do is to make other people start doing all the good things that you are doing too, right? So usually knowledge sharing starts when new developers come in and you share in-depth domain knowledge, and you share important concepts that you're using in your domain or in your team, like how do we do exception handling, how do we do proper code reviewing in our team, all kinds of things like that. But it would be a shame if at a certain point this knowledge sharing stops. I think it would be better to keep the knowledge sharing a regular and easy thing in your sprint, for example, or in your team process. To give you an example, what we do in our team is we have a weekly session of 30 minutes, what we call the knowledge corner, and it's pretty low key. Somebody prepares it a little bit and presents just some information, can be about basically anything. Can be the ins and outs of a new Java release, can be an interesting issue and solution that we've been working on. It doesn't really matter. But by doing this, first of all, you keep this process going of gaining experience yourself and handing over experience by others. And also you help other people to grow by giving them the opportunity to present, for example. Last thing about increasing impact, and this is an important step, is about feedback. In order to learn, we need feedback. How am I supposed to learn from my mistakes if nobody tells me what I could do better, right? Now, feedback, providing it and receiving it is not always easy. Personally, for example, I'm a conflict avoiding person, and therefore I sometimes have the urge not to provide feedback because it feels like conflict. Personally, I feel what helps is to see feedback a little bit as a opportunity to learn. So if you see giving feedback as giving somebody else the opportunity to learn, it's something positive actually. And or put in a different way, if you do not give feedback to somebody else, you deny somebody else the opportunity to learn. So we wouldn't want that, right? I think by seeing it that way, it might make it a little bit easier, because then it's an important step in the process. All right. Last point. I mentioned that your working time is limited. Yes, so we should better make our efforts count, right? And make our working hours count. Okay, so we should do that, of course, by focusing on what's important, but what's important is then, of course, the question. Well, we talked a little bit about analysis and solution design. I think that these are really important, and you should not cut any corners here and really put in the time here. And the reason is that if we don't do that, we run the risk of either building the wrong solution or building a solution for the wrong problem. And that could be a huge waste of implementation hours. So that's why I think it's worth our time. Similarly, we talked about writing good user stories. Again, we want to avoid that what's being built is something else that we intended to be built, right? And if that means I have to spend 5 extra minutes writing some details in a user story that could potentially save hours or days of work, then that's definitely a good use of my time. Another dimension that I think is important to consider when deciding what to focus on is how hard is something to change in your code, for example. So if you look at your API, your synchronous, asynchronous bulk interface, suppose we want to do a breaking change in your synchronous API. Well, what does that mean? Well, we have to create a new version of the endpoint. We have to build it, then we have to communicate to other teams. Could you please migrate from the old version to the new version? Then we have to wait, then we have to push them, they have to build stuff. Then in the end, we have to deprecate the old endpoint and remove it. Well, that's quite a lot of work, right? Same for changing your database. Changing a column type or name is more work than just renaming a variable in your code. So if you are, for example, writing user stories, or you're doing code reviewing, or you're designing solutions, it's more valuable to spend your time focusing on your API, your database, or even which microservice am I going to build certain logic in, than it is to go into the implementation details or your tests, which might be easier to refactor. All right, last 2 things. Sometimes we need to spend some time to save time in the long run. And I'm talking about efforts to take away time and energy drains. Think of things like incidents that happen regularly that take a lot of your time, or bugs that lead to damage that need repairing that take a lot of time, or legacy code that is slowing you down. It can very well be that by spending some time fixing bugs or cleaning up legacy code or setting up proper monitoring and other thing, it takes time, but it might save more time in the future. And this is something that, of course, you have to discuss with your product owner and the rest of your team, etc. But if you're convinced that this is the case, then probably this is a good, this is worth spending your time on. Do note that if legacy code is not slowing you down, then it might not be worth your efforts, because then it might be just taking time without getting the profit back in the future, right? Lastly, we talked about sharing knowledge. I would like to point out that sometimes other people in your team are very knowledgeable about subjects or tools that you're less knowledgeable about. That's great. You can use that to your advantage. For example, I don't know a lot about the Spring framework, but other people in my team do. So that means that I just have to know the basics without having to know all the details. And we still have all that covered in our team. And that saves me a lot of time that I don't have to spend on learning all the ins and outs of this tool. All right, summarizing. What can we do to grow as a software engineer? Taking up more and more responsibility, like we talked about, designing bigger and bigger solutions. This is a big part. Like I said, don't forget to do things together, involve your team, help others to grow, and focusing on what's important. Now, of course, there's much more to it, but I hope these things can help you a little bit to grow as a software engineer, and of course, for you to make that promotion in the end. Thanks very much for your attention so far.